Hello, my name is Dominique Brown, and I'll be presenting my final project. I proposed using data for the 2015 graduation rates for New York City Public Schools by borough. The link for the data is at infohub.nyced.org. I discovered the data by looking for graduation rates in New York City. The data was free and legal to use as well. I could not find any documented data cleanup for this data as well. The data has 327 rows and 27 columns with 1.3 megabytes. The second data set I used is New York City median income. The link for this data is data.cccnewyork.org. The data was also free and legal to use and could not find any documented data cleanup for the data set. And the data had 3,646 rows, 6 columns. I understood the context of the data because I've done previous research into education when it comes to income. Yes. The two questions we'll be answering in this project are: 1, does graduation rates increase with higher median income? 2, is the average families with children median income lower than the average median income for all households? I hypothesize that the graduation rates will be higher in areas that have higher median income, and I also hypothesize that the average families with children median income will be lower than the average median income for all households. Skip over the conclusions and come back to that later. Some primary observations about the two data sets. The first data set of median income in New York City. The columns are borough, household type, cohort year, and median income. Some things that are good to understand are the different types of household types, which are all households, families with children, families, and families without children. The second data set is the graduation statistics for each borough. The main column that's important to understand for this project is percent grad. This is the percent of students graduating that year. This does not include students that are still enrolled for another year, such as a 5th or 6th year, or have dropped out. I used the percent grad instead of percent dropout because it more accurately shows the actual graduation rate, and this data can be used by policymakers on where funds should be directed for schools in New York City. First thing I did for my project was to import the median income CSV, and I took a look at it, and you could tell that the top 4 rows have extra text that was on top of the CSV that isn't really part of the data set. So the first thing I did was to drop the top 5 rows, which included those 4 rows that have extra text and also the row that has the actual column names, and we'll rename them later, and this is later. The second thing I did was to rename the columns. I renamed them to borough, median income, borough, household type, cohort year, data format, and then income. You don't need data format because it just says what the what the data format is for the income, which is all USD, so it's unnecessary. The next thing I did was to get rid of all the rows that are not 2015 for the cohort year because we're specifically looking at that. So I got rid of all the rows that do not have 2015 for the column cohort year. The next thing I did was to only make sure we were looking at the boroughs. This specific data set had like the overall borough, but then it broken down into communities, which is unnecessary because we are just really looking at the boroughs and it's basically showing the same thing. This is easier to visualize, and then I reset the index because I got rid of rows, and this is what it looked like, the new data frame. The new data frame had 20 rows and 4 columns. Overview of what I did was drop the first 5 rows because it was extra text, rename the columns to actual column names, to make the data frame more manageable, I only kept the rows from 2015 and only kept rows with borough names, and then I reset the index. And the change characteristics were, it went from 3,645 rows and 6 columns to 20 rows and 4 columns due to taking out the 2 columns and only keeping rows from 2015 and the boroughs. The second thing I did was to input the second data set, which was an Excel file of 2019 graduation rates, public school boroughs, and I only chose the all sheet name because there was multiple sheets that had other information that wasn't necessary. And this is an overview of what it looks like. I decided to rename some of the cohort year and dropout and percent grads to not have spaces because of how creating the bar graphs would go. Then I looked at some of the data types to check it all out, and here was the overall. And nothing really changed for this data set, so there was not a lot of characteristic change except for just renaming some things. So now it comes to combining the two data sets. I used the concat function to combine them. You can see that there's a lot of missing values, but it's really it doesn't matter for what we're doing. The data frame shape was 347 rows and 30 columns, and we take a look at the data types. This is important because the income has to be a numeric value for the visualization later on. So right now it's an object, so I changed it to a float. Now we're going to go to visualization. The first visualization I did was to visualize the average median income for each borough. I grouped the median income into the boroughs, and I used a bar graph to clearly see the categories. Note, disregard District 79 because it's not a borough. So I did that, and the bar graph shows that the highest median income was Manhattan, and then second to Manhattan was Staten Island, and then Queens, following with Brooklyn and the Bronx. The second visualization, I decided to visualize a graduation percentage. I grouped the graduation rate by borough and chose a bar graph because it clearly shows the different categories, which are the boroughs. As well as the previous visualization, I used the group by function, and I did it by borough, by grad rate, and then by mean, as well as the one before, as visualization before. Again, disregard District 79. Here, the average graduation rate was highest in Staten Island, followed by Queens and Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. Yes. And then the third visualization, I visualized median income by household type. I used a bar graph, again, because of the categorization of it. I used the group by function, by household type, by income, and then the mean. Here you can see that families with children is lower than families and families without children, but notably it's higher than all households. Yes, and then some patterns that I discovered while doing the project were the correlation between graduation rate and the median income is positive, but it's not strong. The top 3 median incomes do not completely correlate with graduation rate. So what I mean by that is that the highest median income is Manhattan, but it is third on the list of graduation rate. But it is still a positive correlation because the top 3 median incomes are the top 3 for graduation rate, just in a different order. But still then Brooklyn and Bronx follow in the same order as median income. Second pattern was families without children have less income than families and families without children, but all households is less. I believe that's because all households include single income which will bring it down, which was something I did not take into account when originally asking the question, but it's like good to know. So then we go to the conclusions. So I hypothesized originally that the graduation rates will be higher in areas that have higher median income. The answer to that is technically no, because that statement is not correct, because it's a positive correlation, but it's not a direct correlation. And the highest for example, the highest median income was in Manhattan, while the highest graduation rate was in Staten Island. Second hypothesis was I hypothesized that the average families with children median income will be lower than the average median income for all households. The answer to that was also no. This is not true because the average median income of all households include single income households, which will automatically bring it down, where not exclusively true, but more likely than not, you're having a 2-income household with children, but that's not exclusively true. But it does make it lower and is something to take into account. Some overall lessons I learned. I learned how to manipulate data frames and to include only keywords that I want in the rows, for example with 2015 and for the boroughs that I did earlier. And I learned how to manipulate data frames for preparation to combine them. Thank you for listening.